In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston. I am Greg Gaston. I have two special guests today. We're going to talk Memphis Tigers football once again with Frank Bonner, Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian. And then we'll switch off and talk a little hoops with Parth Upadhyaya, who's the Tigers basketball beat writer for, of course, the Daily Memphian. Hope you enjoy. Lots to get to. The Memphis football team coming off a very important win, 35-32 over Boise State, and now they go into a bye week feeling pretty good about themselves as they get set to host Tulane, which will be a week from this Friday, a huge game at Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. Frank, when it was 17-0 in the second quarter, you were up in the press box. I was down on the sidelines. It wasn't a good feeling in the stadium. What were your thoughts at that point?
To be honest, it was like this. It's looking like this could get out of hand if the offense doesn't kick it in gear. And I think those last two offensive drives really kind of brought some things back to life for them, because without that, who knows what could have happened.
What do you think they did differently to get back into that game down 17-0? Because you're absolutely right. That was a pivotal juncture in that game. If that offense did not produce points on that drive, Boise State gets the ball back. Who knows if they put more points on the board, and then possibly the Tigers go into halftime down 20-0, 24-0, and maybe they never make that comeback. What was the change in offense that you saw that was so productive for them to score and go on to score 28 straight?
Well, for one, it started with the spark, and the spark was Rock Taylor. I mean, that first drive, it was a 75-yard drive. Rock Taylor had 72 of them in 2 catches, right? So he kind of got the thing going, and I think that just got them in a rhythm. And then one thing we talked about last podcast is how consistent can the run game be, not just big explosive plays like we saw against Navy, but can they get the yards that they need to get? And, you know, Blake Watson had 113 yards, and his longest run was a 22-yard gain, which kind of shows some of that consistency that we were looking for.
All the talk, or at least most of the talk, when it came to the running game going into this game was about Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back, who has been sensational. And he was very good in this game. 82 yards, couple of touchdowns rushing, a couple of touchdowns receiving. So he did his job. But let's be honest, Blake Watson may have taken that personally because, as you mentioned, Frank, came out, produced 113 yards, 2 more touchdowns. There is no question, if there ever was the last 2 weeks, who the number one running back is on this Memphis Tigers team. So he matched and at times exceeded Jeanty.
Yeah, and we talked about that last week. That I think I said it could end up being a matchup between Jeanty and Blake Watson. And to his credit, he stepped up to the plate when needed to be, right? The consistency in the run game has kind of been a question mark at this point in the season. And Blake Watson did what he had to do to show that, hey, we can run the ball. We can be the consistent offense that everybody is talking about we can't be. And so good for him to step up. And also good for Seth Hennigan. I mean, we talk about the rushing yards. Seth Hennigan also had 64 rushing yards as a quarterback. And so just his grit and just his will to do what needed to be done in order to get the win, you got to tip your hat off to your quarterback for that too.
He has never shied away from that role. He does not mind running the ball, taking a hit, being physical. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this particular game, it certainly worked, as you mentioned, Frank, 64 yards rushing. But throwing the ball, 18 of 28, 269, 2 touchdowns. There was a drop or two involved in that as well. But most importantly, no INTs. The Tigers did not turn over the football. That was a key.
Yeah, there's no way you can get down 17-0 and expect to come back and turn the ball over. And so I think once they got down 17-0, the hyper focus of like the margin of error at this point is almost zero if you want to get back into this game. And so that's what you want to see out of your third-year quarterback. When your back is against the wall, can you count on him to steer the ship and to bring life back into the offense? And you saw that out of him, which is what you want to continue to see out of who is now a veteran quarterback in Seth Hennigan.
17-14 at the half. Boise State still has that lead. And then in the third quarter, a huge play for Memphis, one of the biggest defensive plays that we have seen in years, as Jeffrey Canton-Arku, the Canadian, blocks the field goal attempt and then races 80 yards for the touchdown to give Memphis the lead at 21-17. Just an incredible individual effort, great athleticism, and who knew that Canton-Arku had that type of speed?
Yeah, right. And you could argue in the same vein that I said that first drive with Rock Taylor is what sparked the game for them. This blocked field goal, you could argue, is what won the game for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that play, because they came out those first two offensive possessions and it was two punts, right? They didn't get it going. After that play, the team looked like it had a little bit more swagger to it, and that kind of lasted through the rest of the game. So kudos to Jeff. Like you said, when he got the ball, he put the Jets on and he did not look back.
It was interesting, Frank, because Boise State at first looked like they were going to go for it on fourth down. They called the timeout. They came out with the kicking team. I thought it was the right move. Obviously, hindsight's 20/20. It backfired. What did you think when they called the timeout? Did you believe they would bring out the kicking team?
To be honest with you, I don't know what. If you call a timeout, that shows that they aren't necessarily all that confident in their original decision.
Right, exactly.
And so you knew that they were going to get more time to think about it. And to your point, bringing out the kicking staff, I don't think that was a wrong move. You were up 3. You had already stopped the offense, the Memphis offense, twice to start the second half.
Mm-hmm.
You go up 6. If you get the field goal, you put a little bit more. I mean, things seem to be going in Boise State's way at that particular time, where you were confident in your defense to give them a 6-point lead. I mean, you can't look back in hindsight and say, "Oh, we knew that the field goal was going to be blocked," right? So
exactly.
you don't crucify the Boise State coaching staff for choosing to kick a field goal right there.
But now you have the 30,000 plus involved. They started to get there at the end of the second quarter, then halftime hits. Now you come out, as you mentioned, a couple of punts early in the third quarter. You got to get them invigorated or reinvigorated, and certainly this is the play that did that. Fans on their feet, standing, applauding, going crazy, and Memphis was able to use that home field advantage, I think, to a big advantage in the fourth quarter as those fans became very boisterous. Go ahead.
Which is why I think Boise's biggest mistake. I mean, you dominated that entire first half. There's no way that you can play the way you did and then go in that locker room only being up 3.
Right.
Like that, they're probably kicking themselves after the fact of letting that happen on the road.
It was interesting, Frank, and I don't want to talk too much about Boise State and what they did, but I thought they got a little bit away from the game plan. And I thought they got away from Genty for a while there. In the second half, they were feeding the beast. He ends up with 23 totes. But again, 82 yards, Memphis is pretty happy with that. It wasn't 150 or 200 yards, which he's been putting up seemingly every game. He does score the 4 touchdowns, 2 rushing and 2 receiving. But I thought they got more to their game plan, which was feed Genty in the second half. In the first half, surprisingly, came out, threw the ball, Talon Green, and then they had the backup quarterback come in. He's chucking the ball around. So I don't know if the Memphis defense was not as prepared for them to throw the ball as much as they did, and they got out to that great lead, 17-0. But in the second half, I thought they did the right thing in feeding Genty. But again, that Memphis defense finds a way, even when they're struggling within a game, to get stops or to make changes and to change the momentum of the game. And that's exactly what they did there until late in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, right. Now, I remember saying this to Tim Buckley in the press box, and this was before the blocked field goal. I said, man, if they want to win this game, that defense is going to have to probably end up scoring a touchdown.
Make a play.
And it ended up being special teams. But I think just the staple of what this team looks like it's going to be is you're going to have the defense make some key plays every game. We're probably going to be saying the same thing against Tulane. If things go their way, you'll probably be able to pinpoint a few plays here and there where the defense made some key stops. They did it against Navy. And so I think that's just what you have to expect from this defense moving forward.
Now, there are some alarming numbers. Most notably, 519 total yards for Boise State's offense. That's 2 straight weeks. Now, Missouri, you can understand to a certain degree with those SEC athletes. They went over 500 yards in that game against the Memphis defense, 519 here. But again, when you needed a play, they made a play. And down the stretch, I didn't like the conservative defensive approach late in that game where Boise was able to punch in that last touchdown. They zipped it right down the field. It seemed like it was a matter of seconds and they had 7 on the board. And then you started to go, okay, here we go, because now here comes the onside kick. And we know what happened last year in the Houston game.
Yeah, right. And that's where from a play calling standpoint, you don't want to start play calling to not lose the game. You still have to coach to win the game, right? And when you start coaching to not lose, that's when you get into the conservative situations where teams are able to kind of exploit your play calling. So you don't want to do that, whether it's on offense or defense. You got to keep your foot on the gas and do what got you in the position that you were in the first place.
And they did that, Frank, on offense. It was 21-17. They're in the fourth quarter, and you could see the team possibly going conservative. They did not. They threw the ball, and Hennigan hits Blankensee for that touchdown, which really, it didn't put it on ice, but gave the Tigers that 2-score lead. Obviously, Boise scores in the end. Onside kick, Memphis recovers, game over. But that was huge for a couple of reasons. One, again, gives them a 2-score lead, but also for Blankensee to have another receiver step up to go alongside Rock Taylor, who has a second straight 100-yard receiving game. Of course, you have Kobe Drake, who's got amazing hands, probably the best hands on the team. But to have Blankensee, who they're depending on a lot, come through with that big catch and run was very, very pivotal.
Yeah, and that's what you want, because you don't want defenses to be able to hone in on one receiver to kind of lock down Seth's targets or so on. And so you want to be able to have that variety. But to be honest with you, I am a little, I don't know if concerned is the word, but since I've been here, the tight end position has always been a nice blanket for Seth to look at in the middle of the field, especially in red zone situations. And you saw him target Landfear a few times over the course of the game. And the quarterback tight end connection just isn't what it has been in Seth's first 2 years. I think if they can kind of get that back on track, that will also help open up some things in the passing game, but we just haven't seen it yet this year.
Can't agree with you anymore. The tight end has been a big staple of the Memphis offense for years now, going back a couple of tight ends, to Joey Magnifico and then the Sean Dykes. Last year, as you mentioned, Caden Prieskorn. Now you want to use Landfear in that capacity, and it hasn't happened so far. It has not materialized to this point. All right, let's talk turkey here, because Memphis got the win. That's the most important thing. They're 4-1. Fans, I'm sure, are engaged as they get ready for the big showdown a week from Friday. But Ryan Silverfield said in his post-game remarks, he's waiting for a complete game. He said, we still have not played a complete game, and they continue to struggle early in the games. I don't know if he can pinpoint it. He certainly hasn't. So if he can't, we can't. What do you think the issues is to such a problem of getting off to the slow start like they have?
I don't know. I don't know if it's, I know a couple of times, I think, like Bethune-Cookman. Obviously, I know Bethune-Cookman.
Right.
But even Ryan said against Bethune-Cookman, they did some different things on defense that they weren't ready for. I don't know how much of that plays a factor into it, but it just looks like the team just needs a jolt. Every single game, they've got to get a jolt. They don't start with that jolt. I don't know if you can scheme your way out of that. Maybe you do some different play calls that maybe you try to go for an explosive play right off the bat. Play action pass down deep. Do something to kind of ignite the offense to get the thing going.
Well, I like what you're saying, because don't get me wrong, this team is prepared. This team is ready to go each particular game. But for some reason, they just can't get off to a quick start and had to rally a couple of times. The Navy game with a big second half. They obviously were able to come back against Missouri, but it wasn't good enough. In this game, the big comeback from 17 down. Now, last year's team, they wouldn't win these games. And the motto going into the season, as you know, Frank, was just finish. And they're finishing. So that's the good news, right? They're finishing games. They're finding ways to win. But if they can get off to quicker starts, maybe they won't have to worry about having to come back like they have.
Yeah, because what you don't want and I know they have a bye week, which kind of helps that off, but they've had 3 consecutive emotional ending to the games, right? Navy was a close one. Missouri was a close one that dropped. This Boise State one went down to the wire. You want to have some weeks where you're able to kind of exhale in the fourth quarter. You know what I mean? Because eventually, on one end, you could say, well, if we keep having these close games, then we're prepared for anything. The next time we get in a close game, you'll feel like you've been there before. On the other end, it's like, man, the margin for error every game is so small that eventually you feel like you're going to trip up and maybe lose one. And so kudos to them for winning the close games. Because one thing that we know, Memphis coach teams on the Ryan Silver field, more times than not, they're going to have their chances in the fourth quarter to win the ball game. They're going to be right there in the ball game. The last 2 years haven't been able to get it done. This year, it looks like they're more equipped to get it done, whether it be because of a better, defensive players or the playmakers. It looks like they found ways to mitigate some of the mistakes. And so, honestly, we said it last year, right? In a loss, fans can, in media, can pinpoint all of these things that didn't go right, and this is the reason why you lost the game, and so on. But after a win, I'm not going to say nobody cares, but it's a lot easier to look past the flaws if you have more points than the other team every week.
Yeah, it looks like you're nitpicking when you win the game. So 4-1 is pretty much what everybody expected at this point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You didn't expect to win. You thought you could win against Missouri, but you didn't expect to win.
Yeah, I'll say, so looking at the schedule when it was all laid out, and you go in your mind of what you think the win-loss schedule, they're going to win this to this team, lose the team. I've been right every week to this point. So that
deserves a tennis clap.
Well,
right? Or a golf clap.
Yeah, little something. I mean, honestly, like, everybody was probably right the first 3 weeks, right? So the only games that you really had a toss-up in was Missouri and Boise State. So
right.
it's getting harder now that you go into Tulane and everybody else.
Well, we talked about this a couple weeks ago in our initial podcast about how it's important to go 2-1 during this big stretch of 3 games. Obviously, they lost the first one to Missouri, non-conference, beat Boise, non-conference, now the pivotal one. Next week, you and I are going to get down and dirty. We're going to break down that Tulane-Memphis game. It's going to be huge, a week from Friday. Hopefully a great crowd, despite it being a high school football night. But a quick early thought on that one, Frank, when you have both teams that have a bye week, that have the extra time to prepare and to rest. And we know that Tulane got a tussle from UAB last weekend.
Yeah, right. And so that's the thing that's going to be interesting, right? Because UAB was up on them early.
They were.
And so if you're Tulane, you're going into the game like, man, we've got to get a fast start because we were down early. And if you're Memphis, you were down by 17 points. So both of these teams are going to be going into the game next week feeling like they need to get a fast start. And so it may be a race to who starts better.
And Michael Pratt, their star quarterback, did return for that UAB game. So the assumption is he's fine, he's healthy and ready to go, and he'll be battling Seth Hennigan in the quarterback clash a week from Friday when Memphis plays Tulane. Final thing for you, Frank. It was a huge day Saturday, not only with the football game, but the 2003 New Orleans Bowl team being honored. The special ceremony for D'Angelo Williams, part of that 2003 team, as he's the first player in Memphis football history, first player to be elected into the College Football Hall of Fame. So what was that like, being down there talking to the guys and being a part of that celebration where they were really enjoying themselves? Yeah,
it was a nice celebration. You could tell that they even talking to them before the weekend, right? You could tell they really appreciated. They really took it all in. They were having a good time when they were down there pressing the button for the team to come out. They really got excited about that. If you look at what it meant to D'Angelo Williams at halftime, he got pretty emotional, which was
he did.
Yeah, which was a sight to see, just how much it meant to him. And I talked to him. I said, when you came in to Memphis as a teenager, did you ever think that this is how it would be for you? And he said no. He said I didn't ever think that it would be this way. But he said when I joined the team, the offensive coordinator and head coach Tommy West told me if I came to Memphis, that I could do something special. And I thought that was cool to just, as humble as he is after everything that he's done, you got to tip your hat off to a guy like that. And you appreciate just taking the time to sign all of the autographs he did for the fans and everything. I mean, he really took it all in.
There were great players before D'Angelo. Isaac Bruce comes to mind, and many others, and many that have played in the National Football League. But he is proof right there, as he talked about. You can come to Memphis. He was promised by that coaching staff, and you can do everything you need to do to put up the numbers, to get the recognition, to become an NFL player, which they all want to do. And not only did he do that, he was a really, really good NFL player. So it just shows you, again, if you needed the proof, and he's the perfect example, that you can come to Memphis and get everything done and accomplish all your goals.
And not just him, right? So, like, it wasn't a one and done with D'Angelo Williams. After him, you had Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson, Kenny Gainwell.
He opened the door, right?
Yeah, Calvin Austin was a walk-on. Dylan Parham played several positions before he found his niche at offensive line. And so,
Bryce Huff, who played for the Jets.
Yeah, right, who had a pretty good game this week. And so
yes.
Just to see that, the whole Power Five, Group of Five conversation, whatever, there's a lot of talent that can come into Memphis and shine, even if you were one of the talents that was looked over. I think that's the important piece if you're in that Memphis locker room and trying to recruit kids, is that you don't have to be the 4 and 5 star to make it to the NBA, to make it to the NFL, and Memphis has kind of proved that.
Well said, Frank. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, I appreciate you.
We continue on the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast, talking Tigers basketball with Parth Upadhyaya, who's the Tigers basketball beat writer. Hey, Parth.
Hey, man. Happy to be on my first appearance, my debut on the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast.
Well, it's great to have you. Obviously, you've been on my radio show a number of times, so we have thrown around a lot of different topics, and that's what we'll do right now is we want to dive into it because fans are certainly hungry to find out what's going on with this 2023-24 Memphis Tigers basketball team. And practice just underway, so we haven't had an opportunity too many times to see them, but you have seen them now a couple of times because you were in the Dominican Republic. You saw the team down there, but the roster has changed since then. So we'll focus on what you just saw recently and expectations. We'll throw around possible rotations and starting lineups and things of that nature. But when you had a chance during the open practice part to go over and watch, what jumped out at you?
Yeah, I think the two things that almost everybody in Memphis media has mentioned is the size of the team, right? And not necessarily having multiple 7-footers because they don't have that. They've got, I guess, two true bigs in Jordan Brown, 6'11", and Malcolm Dandridge, who's returned now at 6'9". But just the size and length on the perimeter, whether it's, Jaquan Walton or David Jones or Jonathan Pierre, they've got guys who play out there on the wing and are long and lengthy and do a multitude of things. So that's one. Two would be kind of building off that point, multiple shot creators, whether it's guys creating buckets for themselves or creating for others, right?
This is a coaching staff and particularly a head coach who thrives on defense. Defense. We've heard it every single year that Penny has been here as a head coach. And nothing will change as far as that's concerned. But I do believe that this is going to be a more of an offensive-minded team.
Absolutely.
Because they have so many different options. So you do agree?
Yeah, for sure. And I think Penny was asked this last Wednesday during the open practice, at the end of it rather, about the identity of this team and if it'd be different from, the 5 previous Penny Hardaway teams. And he said something along the lines of, I hang my hat on defense, but I'll have to be more open-minded to the fact that we've got guys, 4 guys actually who averaged double-digit points at their previous stops. And that would be, Caleb Mills, Jaquan Walton, David Jones, Jordan Brown. One of those guys did it at the ACC level, and Caleb Mills, another, played, in the Big East and scored 13 points a game, and David Jones. So you've got those guys. You've also got Javon Quinterly, who's proven in his career to be a facilitator and a bucket getter, plus Nick Jordan, and kind of the list goes on and on. So I think Penny is open to that, while I guess keeping in mind that the defense will be a work in progress.
It could be a situation, Parth, where every game, you're not going to have a different score every game, but every other game you could see somebody, you can see one day it's Walton, one day it's Caleb Mills, one day it's Brown, one day it's Quinterly, on and on and on, correct?
For sure. And I think that is obviously a positive, but it can also be a problem if that pecking order isn't established early. If guys aren't comfortable with, okay, tonight is not my night, it's going to be Caleb's night, or it's going to be, like you said, Jaquan Walton's night, or David Jones, or so on and so forth. I think guys kind of have to buy into that working as a collective aspect versus, David Jones gets 10 shots a night, or Jaquan Walton or whoever.
You just brought up an extremely important point that I was going to bring up a little bit later on, and let's dive right into it. Could be a problem. You look at this team, you look at this roster, the ability of these guys, and they've proven it, because the bulk of them are grad students or are here for 1 year. That's good to have. You want to have those. You want to have all these opportunities, all these different combinations you can use, all these options. But it can be a problem if they don't all buy in. So from what you have heard from the players themselves doing interviews, even going back to the DR where you were around this team the entire time, to what Coach Penny Hardaway has said, do you think they're all bought in? Could it be one of those situations where, yeah, we're going to get ours. We're not worried about it. We want to win a national championship? Because if that's the case, this team has a chance to go a long way.
For sure. We spoke to Jaquan Walton about this, and he said, something along the lines of, this is scary. We've got so many weapons. We've got guys who can have their night, like you said, Greg, on any given night. So I think now, on October 3rd, it's easy for guys to buy in, and they have.
Right. Now,
once the season begins and you're going through that, rigorous non-conference slate, and let's say you drop one here, drop one there, that's when guys are like, oh, he was taking
finger pointing,
a little bit of finger pointing, a little bit of saying, oh, if I had a play drawn for me here, if I had this shot or that shot, that's when guys, I think it's going to be most crucial for them to stay together and kind of be patient.
It's interesting because last year it was a two-headed monster. It was Kendrick Davis and DeAndre Williams, and everybody else, and most of those guys, again, veteran players, grad students, who knew their role. And as the season progressed, they got better. And they made a good run, and unfortunately, defensive collapse at the end against Florida Atlantic, and the rest is history. But it was a team that got better because they knew their roles. They knew that Davis and Williams, they were the two options. Right. This team, again, you're going to have probably 5 guys on the floor, and that includes guys who come in the rotation that are all capable of scoring. It's a different setup for this year.
For sure. And I think, back to what you and I were saying a couple minutes ago, that's the challenge, right? Like, how does Penny Hardaway and his staff establish who those 2 or 3 guys are? Or is that not established? Is it just kind of, like we said, a round robin of leading scorers? I think that is the main question to answer, followed by the defensive concerns, which we can get into in a bit here.
All right, so what do you think right now? And again, it's so early and you're not privy to inside information from Penny telling you what the lineup will be, what the rotation will be. He may not know it at this point.
Right.
What would be your most educated guess as to the starting 5 game 1, assuming no injuries, no issues, and let's assume for a moment DeAndre Williams is not going to get that waiver.
Right. See, that's tricky because you've got, in my opinion, 4 guys who are going to be, penned, if not sharpied into that starting 5. Javon Quinterly at the point. Mm-hmm. Caleb Mills playing in the backcourt alongside him. Jordan Brown is obviously their best center, so he'll start there.
Jaquan Walton.
And I think that's where it gets tricky, right? So you've got, not 4, you got 3 guys you can Sharpie in. Okay. And then you've got 2 spots remaining between Jaquan Walton, David Jones, and Nick Jourdain. So if you want to go more of a traditional lineup with a 6'9" power forward and a, 7-foot center, you put Jourdain there, right? Who can do some of the more traditional big man type things. If you're going to go small, I could see them playing David Jones, who is 6'6" and rebounds well and is versatile at the 4 as well, alongside Jaquan Walton. So you can mix and match different things. If I had to guess at this point, I think they would go, David Jones and Jaquan Walton, if that makes sense. So David Jones at the 4, Jaquan Walton at the 3, along with Javon Quinterly, Caleb Mills, and Jordan Brown.
And I think Jaquan Walton's actually a little taller than David Jones. Is he not 6'7"?
He is 6'7". But David Jones is a tall 6'6". You saw him.
He is, and he could be really physical at times. What's interesting, though, and
call him the Beale Street Bully.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point that you can do a couple of different things with that starting lineup. Again, assuming right now that those 6 are the ones in the mix, it could be somebody else that we're not even talking about yet. But David Jones arguably has been the most impressive guy.
He has. And I think, to me, what's been most impressive watching him, both in the DR and, the other day at practice, is kind of his efficiency. This is a guy who only shot 29% from three last season at St. John's, is less than 30% career 3-point shooter in his 3 years of college basketball. But he's looked good, both, catching and shooting right on the perimeter and getting that shot off the dribble. Obviously we've seen small sample sizes, but when we've seen him, that shot has been going in and it's been effective, right?
And as you mentioned, he rebounds the basketball, as does Jaquan Walton as a big guard.
Correct.
You can't have 5 leaders out there. You can't have 5 captains, if you will, right?
No.
Who are going to be the 1 or 2 guys that are going to lead this team with their voice?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know about with his voice per se, but just leadership ability in general, whether it be vocal or by example, whatever. I think Javon Quinterly is the no-brainer alpha of this team.
Okay.
I spoke to him at length in the DR. We sat for about 40 minutes, kind of chopped it up like you and I are doing now, and he talked about kind of Penny instilling that confidence in him, right? Like bringing him in to be the guy, to be the straw that stirs the drink, if you will, the orchestrator. So that's number one. And Penny mentioned that too. Then you've got Caleb Mills and Jaquan Walton as well, right? So I think it's those 3 guys who, have played a lot of college basketball, played the game at a high level, and have been the guy both from on the court and off the court perspective at the respective schools, who are now going to come together and spearhead this Tigers team.
What's interesting is with Penny having 2 sons, one being a freshman in Ashton, Jaden has been around this program for a long time.
He has.
As has Malco. Now, Malco's a different story. I think with Jaden, Penny may depend on him, maybe not as a starter, but a guy who's certainly going to be in the rotation and may depend on him as being one of the leaders out there.
For sure. And I think, it's different when and Jaden Hardaway is a really solid player.
We've seen this with each
better every year. We see this guy come in as a walk-on and really earn his keep there. But I think it is different when you're playing a smaller role versus when you're, one of the key guys offensively and defensively for this team. It's probably easier to get that message across when you're out there.
Because you're going to be out there
when
more,
you're out there for, 30, 35 minutes, whatever it may be. But I think you're absolutely right. Jaden Hardaway and Malcolm to a certain extent are guys that Penny's going to rely on to relay the philosophies, relay the message, kind of help set that groundwork, that he's built throughout the 5 years and kind of spread that message in the locker room.
Penny has been criticized at times for going too deep in his rotation, and he pulled it back last year, and it worked out. You look at this roster, Parth, and it's hard to kick anybody out, but there are going to be guys that are kicked out of the rotation.
For sure.
You just talked about 6 guys for 5 spots. Second unit rotation, what do you say?
Yeah, and I actually wrote about this in my Tigers Basketball Insider newsletter, which came out earlier today. Just looking at who's going to be the odd man or odd men, out. Because you've really got, I can go down the list here. You've got about 11 guys who could reasonably, we can expect them to contribute, right, to this team. 6 we've already named. So you got the six transfers. There's 8 transfers that came in, but 6 of them are going to be in the mix for starting jobs. Jalen Young, the transfer from UCF, the point guard.
Backup point guard?
He's their only true backup point guard, and he looked good as well, man. Like, I was talking to his mom on the phone the other day, and she was just telling me how easily he's acclimated, right? Like how easily he's found comfort and found his niche with that team. And he was going at Quinterly. I mean, I was surprised by his kind of burst of speed and ability to get by guys. So that's your only true backup point guard. You're going to obviously need him and rely on him. Then you've also got, we talked about him, Jaden Hardaway and Malcolm Dandridge, the 2 returnees. Malcolm is the only true backup big. If we're assuming Nick Jourdain has the possibility of starting, he is the only true, at least center, right, off the bench. So, you're going to play him, whether it be 10, 12 minutes a game. And then you've got, we said Jaden. So that's another 3 guys. So you're adding
9 guys now.
So you're at 9 guys. Now, Ashton Hardaway, to me, has been very impressive. His ability to shoot the ball and even do some things.
Does he look like their best outside shooter?
At this point, yes.
Okay.
From what we've seen, once again, small sample size, but he looks like their best and most consistent outside shooter. So, maybe he's in the mix. Carl Scherenfant looked.
I like him a lot.
I like him. He's looked physically ready to play at this level from the minute he stepped on the floor, right? From the minute we saw him in the DR, even when he doesn't have good games, he's there. He's not checking out of the game. He's physically imposing himself on both ends of the floor. So he's in the mix.
Yeah, but no guarantees that he's in the rotation, right?
No, and that's what I'm getting at, right? So you've got 9 guys, which I think, as outside media or even fans, you can kind of expect, okay, those 9 guys are going to be in the mix in some form or fashion. And then if you're going to go 10 deep, if you're Penny and going to go 10 deep, you've got Ashton Hardaway, Carl Sharonfont, Jonathan Pierre, and JJ Taylor left to play with. Right.
Give me a quick synopsis on Pierre and on Taylor and about their possibilities of being in the rotation.
Yeah, kind of just from speaking to people in and around the program in the DR and even, prior to that trip, it seemed like Jonathan Pierre and JJ Taylor, those were the 2 guys that kind of had a little bit of ways to go, right, in terms of, acclimating, feeling comfortable in the roles, playing at this level. JJ Taylor, a skilled scorer, but, he's a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take time. Jonathan Pierre, one of the most sought after Division II transfers in the country. But once again, that jump from D2 to D1, can be sizable. And when we've kind of seen that. So I think those 2 guys, it depends what their progression's been like since that DR trip. Obviously, we've only seen them for an hour, at that open practice. So those are the 2 question marks. But man, Pierre, he's listed at 6'9", but if you look at him next to Jordan Brown, who is 6'11", they don't look that much different in height.
No, they don't. I noticed that as well.
Right.
I noticed that as well when I was over there.
Right.
All right, 2 more topics.
Sure.
One, DeAndre Williams. I mentioned his name earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There's still that possibility. There's still hope, although you have to think with each passing day, the chances are being minimal that he'll be on this team. But if you get DeAndre Williams, you're talking about one of the top players in the conference, one of the better players in the country. What's the latest?
Yeah, I feel like the more days that pass, right, without a definitive final answer, I'll use the word final, the less likely it looks that DeAndre Williams will be in a Tigers jersey, come this fall, come this winter. What
is Penny saying?
I asked Penny about it, pretty directly on Wednesday. I said, hey, there's been rampant speculation that DeAndre Williams has already been denied once by the NCAA, that you guys are now in the appeals process or the reconsideration process, whatever you want to call that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? And where does that stand? And, Greg, you were there. You kind of said, I can't speak on that. I let the university, I let the athletics compliance office do what they do. And I just kind of wait and hope, right, is what he said. He's used the word hope before, but if you're reading between the lines and kind of looking at body language and facial expressions, you can kind of see that optimism's been toned down a bit, whether it be from him or from, others familiar with that situation.
And he's a half full guy too. So he's always going to be optimistic.
He is.
We'll see. But boy, oh boy, if they are able to get him, I think it's a really, really good team even without him. But if they get him,
it's a dark horse Final Four contender, right? Is it
there's
not?
No question. Again, Williams has more experience than just about everybody in college basketball. And I'm not talking about numerically his age. I mean, he's been around. He's played the game. He's played it at a high level. The other Williams, Mikey Williams, is officially on the roster.
He is, yep.
But again, having to deal with his legal issues, it doesn't look good that he'll be a member of this team, at least for the first semester. And it would take almost a miracle from the legal process to be on this team at all.
Yeah, and look, man, it hasn't looked good for 2-3 months now, right? Ever since this thing kept getting, pushed back. And by thing, I mean preliminary hearing, the likelihood of Mikey Williams suiting up for Memphis this season has gone down and down and down. Penny's made a choice. The program's made a choice to kind of stick by this kid until things clear up, and that's a fine choice. However, I don't know how easily 6 felony gun charges are just going to go away. I don't think that's going to happen.
As we tape this podcast, 26 days until the first of the 2 exhibition games against Lane College. It's just about here, Parth. I know you're excited.
You can feel it. It's the most wonderful time of the year, man. You can feel it getting closer, and I love it.
Well, great stuff. Looking forward to future podcasts with you.
Absolutely.
Want to thank Parth Upadhyaya, the Tigers basketball beat writer, for joining us here on today's podcast, this week's podcast, and also, of course, Frank Bonner, as we talked Tigers football a little bit earlier. Be sure to check out our other podcasts here at the Daily Memphian, the Daily Memphian's Food Podcast, Soundbites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies podcast, also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hill. All our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.